Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our the Hurricane Hub discussion for today, June 21st, 2022. Of course, on a Tuesday, another day of the week to make it through. Certainly, it's the second day of the week, June 21st, Tuesday, starting off this discussion. Talking about not too much, of course, as typical for June. We got Celia in the Eastern Pacific, plus some things to talk about in the Atlantic. As we do start off here with this tweet from Andy Hazelton talking about the tropical waves over Africa, and why we might need to watch it in the coming near future. But first of all, of course, glad to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in for today's discussion. And of course, if you like what you saw today, I would really appreciate it if you go ahead and subscribe, share this video with family and friends. Really help this channel get going and, get this channel up on its feet, getting the information out to as many people as possible this hurricane season, which is my goal. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Andy Hazelton, as I did talk about before, mentioning how Africa is looking fairly convectively healthy for this time of year, with one wave about to come off and another one just a few days coming from it. By the way, if you want to know what he's talking about this map right here. A wave that's just about to come off the coast of Africa with another wave trailing right behind it. And in my view, they both look pretty aggressively active and pretty strong, especially for June, as what Andy Hazelton is mentioning. And he does mention, of course, that there's still some marginal signal for one or both of these waves to develop some, but it's an uphill battle from late June out in the deep tropics, because notice something out here for the time frame June 21st to June 30th, as he does post, and early July, which he also posts, I think, too, somewhere around here. You can see July 1st to July 10th. Within that time frame, notice how still most of the development is confined all the way to the west. Of course, as we get towards early July, climatology starts to favor the eastern Atlantic a little bit more, but he does mention nonetheless that these are very interesting waves, and for sure, as he mentioned earlier, that there's still some marginal signal for both of these waves to develop a little bit, at least out here in the MDR. But of course, it just depends on what exactly happens. But for now, the National Hurricane Center is not mentioning these waves because they are not within the 5-day time scope of potential development, and until it gets to that time period, the National Hurricane Center will not mention these waves, of course. So for now, I guess we can enjoy that the next 48 hours and 5 days are quiet in the Atlantic, but in the Eastern Pacific, the same cannot be said. We have Celia, which just has re-strengthened from a tropical depression that was just meandering off the coast of Central America as a very sheared, almost completely remnant low system. And in my opinion, arguably it did reach remnant low for a short period of time, but it's now back at 40 miles per hour, 1,005 millibars, and it is located, if you're using a tracking map to kind of pinpoint the coordinates of the storm, it is at 11.6 north and 99.5 west, and it is moving west at 12 miles per hour, excuse me. And this is basically just going to go towards the west-northwest, not really impact any land, and we'll take a look at the cone shortly. But looking at the Atlantic general view of things right now, not too much going on. We have this trough, of course, off the East Coast, and this model of support that does actually hint that we might get some sort of small cutoff low that tries to develop and take advantage of the warm Gulf Stream waters out here, and then develop as it swings back northward out to sea and away from the United States. We'll look at that in a little bit, but generally the Atlantic is quiet of any major activity. A strong tropical wave, of course, coming off that has already exited the coast of Africa, probably embedded within the intertropical convergence zone somewhere within here. A tropical wave also noted by the islands. I guess we talked about this yesterday. If you remember, there was this robust wave roughly within this vicinity. Well, it's now moved westward, and of course looking a lot less robust today. Obviously you could see the strong upper level winds from the upper level atmosphere, and of course that's typical of this time of year. Probably another tropical wave in here because of all the activity, and it's probably I guess you could say it's probably interacting with the huge Central American situation with a lot of convection, the Central American gyre, a lot of convection associated with the storm just by Central America. Maybe another tropical wave in here, and obviously a tropical wave, as we did talk about, that Andy mentioned in his tweet today, a tropical wave exiting Africa. That's Celia. This is probably the tropical wave he is talking about. That's going to exit Africa, and over the next few days, we'll have to see if this does develop. I'm not sure if it's this wave or it's the wave behind it. That models are hinting at might try to do some sort of development once it gets towards the central western MTR. But we'll have to see. And here's Celia, as we just did, of course, mention that the National Hurricane Center is saying that Celia has now gone back up to a tropical storm. And you could see it's only at 40 miles per hour for a good reason. It's still very disorganized. You could see that shear is still very much impacting the storm. As why you could see that, yeah, there's this huge convective outburst, very strong pinks and even some violets, which is indicative of basically the top end of the scale, indicated on Celia here. And usually in any usual situation, you would think, my goodness, this is trying to really strengthen it, isn't it? Well, you could see that on the eastern flank of the storm, there's a very tight gradient between the very big convective cloud tops and the very warm convective cloud tops, which is a hint that there's a lot of easterly shear, and the storm is still very disorganized. Basically, what we like to call a cold convective canopy, or convective or cold convective cloud tops, as we'd like to call it, a CCC. And basically what that means is just that there's a lot of convection with this storm, but there's no structure because there's shear. And that's what we usually see, but sometimes with very sheared storms with a lot of convection, they develop the CCC pattern, and that's basically what we see here with this storm. And of course, Celia is expected to move basically off to the west-northwest, not impact any land mass. Mexico is out of the threat for this storm, but this will continue on its west-northwest path, still expected to become a hurricane, rough peak around 80 miles per hour from the National Hurricane Center. Other than that, only thing to really worry about is swells. Definitely got to be careful with that, because that could be a huge danger if you're not careful with swimming along the coast. But of course, to the surfers out there, the huge swells and the rip currents will cause much bigger waves for the surfers to definitely be hitting the beach of Mexico. So definitely something to watch. Vorticity across the Atlantic. Well, one thing for sure, you can see that there's potent vorticity associated with Celia, so Celia is making its mark. This other very potent vorticity associated with Blas, which died yesterday into a remnant low from the National Hurricane Center. So that's no longer a worry. And then, of course, we have all of this activity off the east coast of Africa, which we know there's a very potent wave moving off the coast of Africa. Well, that's very notable in the vorticity. There's a major kind of blob of vorticity, of course, not defined at all, not circular enough, nowhere near it to become a tropical system, and it probably won't do so, at least now. And then we have the other tropical wave that's off the coast of Africa, that's right in here, and of course not expected to develop. And then we got this other area that's in the Bay of Campeche. That's probably another tropical wave that came off the coast of Africa many days ago and traversed itself across the western Atlantic, and now it's in the Bay of Campeche. And of course we have, I guess, what it was a tropical wave, and is now associated with this huge, large area of vorticity associated with the Central American gyre, as we like to call it. Lots of low-level vorticity over Central America because of favorable background state that is occurring over there, and it is still occurring which is hence why we got Blas and Celia. But of course, we're not seeing any consolidation occur in the Atlantic, which is why we have not really seen much development this June, which is typical. That really needs to be emphasized. It's typical. I see a lot of people are complaining that we're not seeing a lot of activity like we thought we would in June. But the question is June really supposed to be active? Even in hyperactive years, we don't have years that are booming with June storms compared to the last 2 years where we had 3 storms last year. That's a lot, and that's well above normal. And 2 storms in 2020 in June, that too is above normal. We usually typically see sometimes not even any storm at all form in June, or the more average, we see one. So um, it's really not out of the norm that we're just getting just one storm. And really, the early season doesn't matter with activity that comes later on. Hence why we usually, most importantly, focus towards the August, September, October period, because that's where most of the activity in the Atlantic occurs anyways. But of course, keeping that in mind, let's take a look at what the models do show for the next few days. And by the next 2 days, we could see that wave that came off the coast of Africa, very robust. And there you see this huge kind of low pressure that tries to consolidate, very strong vorticity signals, and it just try to consolidate into its small little own storm that does develop off the coast of America, the Northeast, and then kind of shoots itself back north into Atlantic Canada, and then a trough from there takes it off, and then nothing much goes on. But then you could see right down here around hour 138, 120, and past that, you could see that there's some tropical wave that does come off the coast of Africa. And you see the GFS does try to consolidate it some. Now this run is actually a little different because it doesn't consolidate it as much as previous runs. And as we take a look back into the next 10 days as we go out, you could see that then it's now become a lot more traceable in the Western Caribbean. It takes the storm roughly, I guess the reason why it doesn't develop much is it takes the storm right into Central America, riding it, and then now because of that we have the leftovers present right in the Western Caribbean, barely a defined system at all. As if we go to the Euro, for instance, you could see that they have a string of pretty notable, robust tropical waves, and that wave that the GFS doesn't develop. Notice that it actually on the Euro, it does develop and become something. And as we go back towards hour 6 from the Euro, from the latest forecast, they too, have that small East Coast feature, which is might be something to watch. Maybe that'll get Bonnie. We'll have to see. But you do notice on the Euro, despite this having a fast-moving feature, notice that the Euro does too spin this up. Actually, very notable reds in the vorticity. Definitely a sign that this has some sort of consolidated energy and is attempting to become a tropical system. So we'll have to watch and see exactly if that does try to do so, and the Euro does try to spin something up in the Gulf too. Maybe we'll have to watch that. You never know. Probably might be associated with some sort of mesoscale activity. You don't know, because sometimes those things can really spin up very quickly and catch a lot of people off guard, as seen in past years. So you don't know whether or not that might or might not be something. You can't really disregard that. And then we also see another robust wave on the Euro just behind it, and there's some talk about that too, maybe trying to develop. You can see it has a very robust signal and is definitely defined. And then you could see a train of another wave that tries to get going to the east of both of those waves. And on the Euro ensembles, we could kind of take a look at a better picture that you see the east coasting on the Euro ensembles. A lot of them hint at it, and then you see the strong wave signal kept south in the Caribbean, moves through the Caribbean, then another wave develops right behind it, and then will we see another signal for a third wave? I guess that is the other wave. And then they also have the signal in the Gulf too. Very neat picture on the Euro. But it is important to mention that Andy Hazelton mentions that with the environment of whether or not we will see something to develop, it's very important to mention that we're still in June and we still might not get something to develop. And with that, Andy Hazelton does try to remind us and keep us in mind that the GFS depicts a fairly stable and dry MDR north of the ITCZ next week, which is fairly typical of this time of year. Obviously, climatology does not favor as much that area in the eastern Atlantic as much as we'll see later on. But he does mention that shear is pretty low for this time of year, but it's not a very favorable aerodynamic pattern, which is why we still need to watch to see that. And the thing is, you can see on both of the models, on the GFS and the Euro, both of the models do hint at these strong easterly trades kind of gliding across the Atlantic, which is kind of a signal, yeah, that there's still easterly trades. And as we saw with past storms like last year's Elsa, they kind of struggled because of the easterly trades, and they kind of struggled to maintain a closed and defined structure because they were speeding off to the west very quickly, which is why we still need to keep in mind it's June. Not always will these model signals be right with trying to hint at something to develop, which is why, of course, we'll have to watch and see if this does actually develop into something. And of course, we'll be watching here to see if this does develop into something. And of course, we'll see if does this even try in the first place. That's the main thing we'll need to watch and see over the next few days. But other than that, not too much to talk about in the Atlantic, of course, as typical for this time of year. But of course, we'll see that uptick as we get closer and closer towards the year, especially as we're expecting active year. Would imagine it would uptick a lot as we get much later into the year, closer towards August, September, and October, which is, of course, the peak of the hurricane season. And besides that, I guess that's that. Not much to talk about. Of course, Celia in the Pacific, and I guess there's model signals. We'll have to see if something else tries to develop in the Pacific, but MJO will be kind of moving away from the Pacific and towards the Atlantic, which is why we're seeing models hinting at this. And then after that, of course, it gets a little bit too far out for our short range knowledge to really pinpoint clearly. So we'll have to see what happens. But other than that, I guess that does wrap up today's discussion for the Hurricane Hub. If you did like what you saw today, like, subscribe, share, as they say, always, all the good stuff to really help the channel out and help us grow, so I could bring you better information, get access to better resources, to bring you better information on keeping on top of the tropics. Of course, benefit me, and you'll benefit back. Benefits for both of us, which is always good in the end. But other than that, everyone stay safe out there. Peace, love, and kindness to all. Stay stable, of course, especially with all that's going on. And of course, we will see you again tomorrow for tomorrow's the Hurricane Hub outlook and discussion. See you.